For the record, the State Defense, Mr. Medina, all of our jurors are accounted for. Dr. Bodden is still on the stand. Doctor, will you again confirm for me that you are still under oath, having sworn or affirmed to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. State, if you'd like to continue your cross-examination.
Yes, Judge, thank you. So, Dr. Bodden, I'd like to return for a little bit about the what we were discussing with the cabinet door behind Jennifer's head, okay? That was where the bullet struck that we talked about, right?
I believe so, because it
Let's take a look at the photographs. Showing State's Exhibit 66 in evidence. So that's one of the photographs that was taken of Jennifer, correct, that you received as a part of your review of this case, right?
That's correct.
And the bullet strike was right behind her head, is that correct?
No, it's in front of what I see in the bullet is about a foot in front of her head.
Let's take a look on the big screen if you could. Your Honor, may you step down?
There.
Yes, you may,
Thank you.
sir.
So let's show the jurors State's Exhibit 66, right? And we spoke about a bullet trajectory that was in a cabinet near her head, right?
And the only thing I see here is this thing over here.
Right, but that wasn't it, right? It was actually behind her head hit. Let's take a look at State's Exhibit 135. Here we can see it marked with the tape there, correct? The crime scene tape, right?
Is that the same? I think that's the same hole that I was looking at. No?
So you would agree then that that...
I can't tell. That's what it looks like, a little white spot.
Right.
So,
And you can see that that's consistent with the bullet strike, correct?
it doesn't look like a bullet strike, but it probably is if there's a chip of that. There's nothing about it that looks like a bullet, except if there's a chip of that formica that's going into her hair. It would make sense it could be a bullet, but it's not unique to a bullet.
But didn't you testify earlier that that bullet was consistent with the one that was struck and found under the carpet? You said that earlier in your testimony, right?
I would assume that this is the bullet that missed her. There's no exit wound for a bullet in the body. There's 7 bullet entrances, re-entrances, but none of the 7 bullets exited the body.
Right.
Now, the eighth bullet that was fired, basically missed the body, struck someplace. Now, according to ballistics, it struck the formica door. That's what they say. In ballistics, I'll accept that.
Okay,
But
and after it...
And then it was found underneath the rug.
And you would agree, you can sit down, thank you, doctor. You would agree that assuming that that particular strike is in fact a bullet, assuming that to be correct, that strike is fairly low to the ground, correct?
It is where it is.
Right. And you would agree that if a shooter were standing, that would indicate that the shooter had to be aiming down, correct?
If the bullet was standing, then the bullet struck the formica. It says, as I read the ballistics report, this is not my expertise, that it was the size of the bullet, the diameter of the crack. And then I would assume that it struck and went through.
Right, but that wasn't my question. My question was, assuming the shooter was standing, that bullet strike would be consistent with him or her aiming down, correct?
Well, the shot came down. Whether
Right.
aiming or not, I can't say it was aiming.
Right, so the shot was aimed down, correct?
It would have come out when the muzzle of the gun was facing downward. Aiming means a conscious thing on the part of the shooter. I don't know if that's true.
So if the shooter was aiming down, you can have a seat. If the shooter was aiming down, that would be consistent with that strike, correct?
If he were.
Right, okay. And that would be consistent with his target being down low to the ground, correct? If he's aiming down.
No. She falls to the ground. when she falls to the ground, that strike can have already have been there. She could have been standing, and the gun is discharged, and one of the discharges goes downward. She falls down, and her bloody hair lands on that fragment. It gets incorporated in the hair. Is one possibility. I can't say he was aiming for it, or if it happened first, or the first one or the eighth one that was discharged.
Let's go back to then the animation that we were looking at. Which is labeled Series 1. Again, this is the one where you've stated your opinion that this is consistent with Jennifer's position standing up, correct?
I'm sorry? Yes.
Right. And these are 5 shots that go into her wrist or forearm, correct?
That's correct.
And all of those shots in your animation that you've approved appear to be aimed upwards. Is that correct?
Well, may I come up
Yes, you may.
closer?
You may.
No.
After you have a standing permission to get up,
Oh.
when necessary. Thank you.
This is an approximation. There are 5 bullets going through. The person who did this has them going approximately horizontal, all of them. My opinion is that 3 of them go upward to the chin, a little bit upward, and 2 of them go directly across through the left breast, in and out, and then into the right side of the chest. Those 2 are going more or less horizontal. One of them is slightly upwards.
So this is an approximation that you ultimately approve as far as being medically consistent in your opinion, right?
Yes, and also even the chin is approximate. It doesn't mean it's touching. It could be an inch or 2 away. You asked me that earlier.
Right.
But this is just a way of describing things.
But if we were to follow these dials here down, you would agree that that would put the shitter somewhere down there, right? If this were accurate, right?
Absolutely not. How the gun is held, whether the gun is held at waist, I can't tell how the weapon is held, but I think at the moment of discharge, it would go slightly upward from where he's holding it. So he could be on his knees, he could be standing up, he could be sitting down, but the gun is pointing up approximately horizontal. See, the problem with this that I tried to explain to the animator is that once this hits, I can tell you that 5 bullets and 1 through the wrist, but once it hits, the directions change because they hit 2 bones, the radius and the ulna. So when the 5 bullets go through the 2 bones, each bullet changes a little bit in direction because the bone causes it to change. So some of them will then go upward, some of them will go horizontal, and I can't tell you the position of the muzzle after it leaves the wrist, because then the gun, they go in varying directions. So what I'm saying is 5 go in here, 3 go up, and 2 go horizontal.
Okay, but none of these are going horizontal in this animation, right? They're all going up, correct?
I don't know, I can't tell. Maybe, but if it's going up, it's very slightly up.
Okay, and that would put the shooter either down on his knees or aiming down low, pointing up, right?
Or on a chair, aiming up. I mean, he could be on a chair aiming up. I mean, I can't tell where his feet are.
Thank you, Doctor. You can have a seat. So you just said that basically is an approximation, right?
Absolutely.
And you don't purport to show an exact positioning for Jennifer, right?
That's correct.
Because you weren't there and that would be impossible, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, let's talk about defensive injuries, okay? You've heard of the term defensive injuries, right?
Yes.
And defensive injuries are basically caused when a person sees an attack coming and makes some effort to ward off the attack, right?
Yes.
And defensive injuries can be caused by knives or blunt objects or even firearms, correct?
Yeah, they're usually caused by blunt strikes, sometimes by knives, rarely by trying to stop a bullet.
Okay.
But that can't happen.
Right. It can happen because people instinctively raise their arms or hands up to try to protect themselves if they see an attack coming. That's just human instinct, right?
That can happen.
Right. And as a result of that instinct and they're holding their hands up, they cause injuries to be inflicted on their arms or hands, and that's what we call defensive injuries. Is that correct?
If that's the purpose, if the purpose of the holding up the arm is to avoid an injury, yes.
Right. So if someone were attacked, again, hypothetically, with a knife, using a knife as an example, and that person attempted to grab the knife or block the blows, in a situation like that, a person could sustain cuts and lacerations to his or her hands as a result of trying to block the blows of the knife, right?
Yes.
And you've seen cases, I'm sure, in your extensive experience of people who have had lacerations caused by defensive wounds on their hands from a knife attack, right?
Yes.
And so you've reviewed the crime scene photos in this case, correct?
Yes.
And the defendant had no such lacerations on his hands, did he?
The defendant?
Correct. In the crime scene photos that you reviewed, Mr. Medina had no lacerations on his hands. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that a person can also sustain defensive injuries from a gunshot, right? A gunshot attack.
Possible. Yes.
Right, it's possible. It's basically if the person sees the shots coming, and if they raise their arm or hand up in some manner, and they get shots to their hand or arm, and if it was intended to block the bullets, that would then be consistent with a defensive wound in a gunshot type scenario, correct?
That could happen.
Okay, so let's take a look at another exhibit. State's Exhibit 199 in evidence. Doctor, you're familiar with this, correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's Jennifer's left arm, wrist with the 5 gunshots, correct?
Yes.
All right, let's show the jury. Here. So we see a total of 5 gunshots, which you agree are all entrance wounds to that left wrist, correct, doctor?
Left forearm and wrist, yes.
Left forearm, wrist. Okay, so we've got the one at the top, and if you need to step down to take a look as I ask you questions, please feel free to do so. We've got there at the top, number 14, correct?
Yes.
And a bit lower, we have, that's number 15, right?
Yes.
And then right under that one, a little over to the side, is number 16, right?
Yes.
And then number 17 kind of merges with number 16 a little bit, correct?
Well, the outer rims overlap. Yes.
Right, so they kind of form one bigger whole, right?
They're 2 separate holes with the slight meeting of the edges.
Right, and then number 17 is at the very bottom, closest to the hand, right? 18, excuse me, thank you. Now, you testified, I believe, on direct examination that you agree those gunshot wounds are all fairly closely clustered together, right?
Yes.
And I believe you said that that will be consistent with those shots all occurring within a very short period of time, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you would agree that it would be very difficult for the shooter to have sustained injuries of that nature, such a close cluster of injuries, if the person, if Jennifer, had been punching or swinging that arm wildly at the time those shots were fired, correct?
Yes.
So if someone had claimed that Jennifer was throwing or punching with that arm at the time the shots were fired, that would not be consistent with those injuries, correct?
Well, at the moment of discharge of the weapon, the left arm was, for 2 seconds or so, was in one position.
Right. And so my question is, if someone had claimed that Jennifer was punching with that arm at the moment the shots were inflicted, that would not be consistent with those injuries, correct?
That's correct, with that left arm.
All right. And you would agree that the fact that those 5 gunshot wounds are so closely clustered together is more consistent with her arm being relatively motionless at the moment the shots were inflicted. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
All right. Because it's much easier to hit a stationary target than a moving target, right?
If it were moving, there wouldn't be that cluster.
Right. And all of those injuries went through and through Jennifer's body, correct?
Through and through.
They came out the other side.
They went into her body, and they stayed in her body.
Right. We talked earlier about how every single one of those shots came out the other side of her wrist, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then those bullets, after they left that wrist, they then went somewhere else, correct?
In the body, yes.
They all re-entered Jennifer's body at different locations, correct? And you put the locations as 2 to the chin, 2 to the chest, and 1 to the neck, right?
They went up to the chin.
Okay. And all of that is consistent with Jennifer holding her hand up as you demonstrated for the jury, right?
That's right. The arm and hand, so that she was a small person. They covered the chin and the upper breast.
Right. And so if Jennifer, assuming she did see the shots coming, as you stated earlier, and assuming she was holding her left arm up in an attempt to block the bullet, so to speak, even if it was a futile gesture, assuming that was her intent and she was standing still while doing so, you would agree that that would be medically consistent with those being defensive injuries, correct?
That would be possible. Yeah, that would be possible. That's not my opinion the way it is, but it could be.
Okay. Is it consistent was my question.
Consistent, yes.
That would be consistent. Thank you. You can have a seat. Now let's look at those exit wounds while we're talking about this. State's Exhibit 198 of evidence. Doctor, this is a photograph of Jennifer's wrist with all those exit wounds, correct?
That's correct.
Right. And what we see in this photograph are actually only 3 labeled injuries, correct?
Well, there are
Well, 11, 12, 13.
11, 12, 13. That's correct. There are
Right.
3 labels on the perforations.
Right. So publishing it to the jury. And the reason there's only 3 is because several of the gunshots, 3 of the gunshots, all came out in such a close location that they basically formed one large wound, right?
Well, there were 3 wounds that merged together, right?
Right. So 3 of the shots came out in a single area or so close together that they were essentially classified as one big wound, which is number 12 on the photo.
Can I?
Yes, you may.
When the bullets come through this large area, that's a large area. They're not coming in a cluster, they're coming separately. And they cause enough damage to the bone. Remember, the 2 bones that it's gone through, the radius and the ulna, and some, potentially some wrist bones. And bone fragments also spread out. So between the 3 bullets and the bone fragments, a big hole is, a large hole that's much bigger than the normal exit wound. These are normal, 11 and 13 normal exit wounds. And 12, it isn't as if 2 bullets came through 11 or 13. It's that 3 bullets and bone came through 12, and therefore the 3 bullets came through 12.
Right. And so you just stated, I believe, so you agree with me, number 12 is a very large wound, right?
Yes, a large,
Okay.
very large wound.
And that large wound, number 12 in the middle, is consistent with having been caused by multiple gunshots coming out near the same general area, right?
In that area that we have, yes.
Right. And you would agree that this is a very serious injury, correct?
All the injuries are serious.
Right. Both of Jennifer's bones were completely shattered as a result of these gunshots, correct?
At that point, they were shattered, is okay, at the lower edge, yes.
Right. And Jennifer would not have much use of that hand after suffering these gunshots, would she?
No, she could have use of that hand, but the hand would still be intact. I mean,
It would be dangling by shattered bone, though, correct?
dangling. It would be, she'd have difficulty moving the hand.
Difficulty.
It's still intact. The hand is still intact.
Right.
She could have moved her fingers in this situation.
The hand is intact with shattered bone, correct?
But the distal bones can be shattered as they are every day, Sunday in football, and that you can still walk and you can still hold things, not as well as normal. So that, yeah, there's a bunch of fractures on X-ray of the two bones, and but the hand is not totally useless.
Okay. But it would be very,
Less useful than it could be.
yeah.
Normal.
Okay. And you would agree it would be very difficult for Jennifer to do something like punching someone with that hand and all those shattered bones, wouldn't it?
Probably after she was shot, it'd be hard for you to use the hand to punch.
Right. And Jennifer would be in a tremendous amount of pain as a result of all those injuries and those shattered bones, correct?
If she were conscious and remained conscious, it would be painful.
Right. Okay. And you would agree that a wound like this, which is so large, as we can see, I think you yourself described it as large, a wound like this, you would expect that to bleed some, would you not?
Yes, it could bleed.
Okay.
It could bleed, yes.
And once it starts to bleed, that blood then has to go somewhere, correct?
Yes.
It just doesn't disappear into thin air, right?
Right.
Now, in this particular crime scene, you saw the pictures of the surrounding walls in the kitchen, right?
Right.
And you would agree with me that in this particular crime scene, there wasn't a tremendous amount of blood scattered over the surrounding walls and cabinets, right?
Say that again?
You would agree with me that this particular crime scene, this kitchen where Jennifer was killed, it did not have a lot of blood splattered all over the walls and cabinets, correct?
That's correct.
And you've seen, I'm sure, in your extensive experience, crime scenes where there was a lot of blood splattered all over the walls and the surrounding vertical surfaces, right?
Those are usually in stab wounds and knife cuts, which separate the blood vessels and leaves a lot of bleeding.
Right. And
Bullet wounds don't cause as much bleeding as knife wounds.
but they do bleed.
Yes.
Right. And if a person is bleeding from a bullet wound, if they're swinging their arms or swinging their hands and they've got a large gaping wound like we see there, number 12 in particular, you would agree that there's bound to be some indication, some blood that's going to come out and perhaps get on a surrounding wall or a surrounding cabinet, right?
No, she has blood in the first picture you showed while she's laying on the ground. She has blood. Blood doesn't go in her hand. There's no blood in her hand, but there's blood that comes down her arm and into the elbow. So whatever the position was, she didn't bleed the hand. She bled toward the elbow, and that dried. You can see the dried blood in the photos. And she's on her back, so she would have fallen down pretty quickly after these wounds, and the hand would have been in a position where the blood would leak toward the elbow, not toward the fingers. So that there wasn't much blood coming from the edge of the wound. See, it isn't where the arteries are. See, the arteries are, there's two arteries, one on the thumb side and one on the pinky side. And that wound would not have, probably not have injured the two arteries, so it wouldn't have been spurting blood at all. And there was no spurting blood.
Okay. And you just said a moment ago, I believe, that Jennifer would have been put down pretty quickly as a result of these injuries, correct?
Well, as a result of all of it, not that these gunshot, but of all the gunshot wounds, she would have collapsed. She collapsed very quickly after that. Not immediately, but within a few seconds.
So assuming these gunshot wounds all occurred within a few seconds, Jennifer would have been down within a very short period of time, right? And if she's down, she can't be fighting anybody, correct?
Once she's down, yes. You're
Right. So if someone claimed that Jennifer continued to fight with him or her after sustaining these injuries, that would not be medically consistent, would it?
She would have fought for a few seconds. Not too much more than a few seconds, but I mean, she would have fought long enough so that her position would have been different than at the time that she was shot.
Thank you, doctor. You can have a seat. Now, you said before that you cannot tell the order that these shots came in, correct?
That's correct.
So you can't say if the 5 to the wrist came first and the later 2 came next, or vice versa, correct?
That's correct.
There's nothing medically that would support an answer either way, right?
That's correct. not from the autopsy alone.
And you also talked about the x-rays in this case not being labeled. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever reviewed the original x-ray files from the medical examiners in Miami-Dade County?
No, the only ones I saw were the ones on the digital x-rays that I received. I think that the original x-rays from Dade County, if they're not included in the digital reproduction, would include, or should include, the date and the number, the ME number of the case. Because unless there's a number or a name, it could easily be mixed up with somebody else.
Okay, but you haven't reviewed the original records at the medical examiner's office to see if they do have, in fact, all the things that you're saying aren't included on those exhibits, right? You haven't done that.
Well, I assumed that the images that were given were the full images. I mean, if I was given the images that had been cut through, or if things were out, then because nowadays everything is digital, I assume that these were digital to begin with.
So you're not aware that the state actually did turn over a digital copy of the x-rays to the defense, which had all the information on it. You're not aware of that?
I did not see that. If you have if the defense has a digital copy with the date and the on it, that I haven't seen, and I would expect that to have the two different dates that we talked about.
And I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the one of the things you saw. You said you saw a video of the incident, correct?
Yeah, I was sent a video of the incident, and I couldn't make heads or tails of it.
So you watched it, though?
I watched what was sent to me, and I didn't see anything that I could interpret.
Okay. And was this video the full-speed video, or was it a slow-motion video? Do you recall?
I think it was. I think it was a full speed, but I'm not certain.
Okay. And you say that you could not make any determinations from the video, right?
That's correct.
So you would agree that you can't make any determinations as to any particular person being injured or attacked or whatnot from what you personally saw in the video from a medical standpoint, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. 1 second. No further questions. Thank you, Judge.
Redirect?
Doctor, you were mentioning disrobing decedents at the scene, that's something that's improper.
Yes.
Could you explain to the jury why you believe that to be so?
Yes. In all training, the body at the scene and the scene is examined by the crime scene analysts. The body itself should not be touched until it gets to the medical examiner's office or until trace evidence is removed from it before it's being put into the body bag. And then it goes to the medical examiner's office, and the medical examiner can best evaluate the bullets and the bullet trajectories and how close the bullets were by examining the clothing and the skin. See, the medical examiner's most important organ is the skin. The clothing is part of the skin. Fibers, gunshot residues, semen, blood is what we look for as trace evidence on a body, and that also can be on the any clothing that's on the body. So that's why it's very important. And by taking clothing off at the scene, it compromises all of that evidence on the body and nearby at the scene as to where it came from and whether it's hairs, fibers, semen, saliva, blood, so that the rule to medical examiners at scenes is to document the body with photographs, take the body as appropriate to the morgue under good light, plenty of time, and to examine the clothing and to match up the clothing with the bullet wounds. See, the clothing, there was a big hole in the in the shirt behind Jennifer's, Alfonso's back, just to the right of the midline, just the right, which is the bullet that, in my opinion, came straight down to the next to the second thoracic vertebra. And that could be best seen by looking at the clothing, looking at the entrance hole through the clothing, at the entrance hole through the skin, and that is all disrupted if the clothing is removed at the scene. There's no reason to remove clothing at the scene because it doesn't help anybody and it does hurt the autopsy analysis.
Doctor, there was some discussion about the number 3 on this.
Yes.
Can you come over here and explain to the jury? I'm going to show you, first of all, this picture right here that shows this dowel. What, in a situation where the projectile is not found, is it correct to use a dowel like that?
Well, dowels should, as I said, should not be used until after the autopsy. Dowels should not be used, probes should not be used until after the dissection because there's always a danger, and in a number of cases where this is shown to be cause a great deal of grief, the dowel, when you push it down, it can create its own track. So you don't know what's the bullet track and what's the dowel track. So you don't put a dowel in until you figure out what the track was without injuring the track. So this dowel goes the wrong direction, and there's probably a puncture there. But and so in my opinion, this is not a re-entry. It's an entry wound, and it goes straight down as in the photograph, as in this photograph, I'm sorry, if I may. And this is in this photograph, and there's some other photographs, so they took some good photographs of that wound. So it goes straight down, and here's the spine, and it's found right next on the X-ray. Whoops, on this X-ray here, right next to the second vertebra, and it does not cause a hole in the vertebra because for the number 3 coming from the, let's see, on the back, this is the right. Number 3 is on the left. For it to come through this way, it has to, as Dr. Johnson says in the autopsy, go through the third vertebra. Well, we see the third vertebra in this, and more closely in the very first X-ray that was taken. The very first X-ray that was taken while the heart and the lungs are still in the body before any incisions are made. And that vertebra is totally intact. There's no hole through it. See, if there was a bullet hole through the anterior vertebra here, see, here's one. This is the first vertebra. Second, if there were a hole here, T2, you would see it, but this vertebra is the same as all the other vertebrae. There's no hole in it. There's only a dent on the right side, which is where the bullet is seen here, right next to the outside of that of the vertebral body.
In all the autopsy pictures, did you review anything that would have indicated that a dowel was actually placed in shot number 3? Did you review any evidence?
In shot number 3, yes.
Yes.
There was another photograph after the dissection, after the heart and the lungs were removed, which is part of the usual autopsy, the normal autopsy. And it shows the dowel in number 3 going straight down to the left of the spine, down to the lower ribs, is at that point was measured by the dowel.
I'll show you this close-up so you can explain to the jury how this image explains to the jury what that would. Want to see it?
See, this white spot is obliterates part of all the images. So you see a light spot when the
Yes.
yeah. On here, this, if I may, the bullet hole is up here, up by 12 o'clock, if I my finger. And it goes straight down, and it's right now, right here, it's right next to the spine bone, which is that we saw in the very first, yeah, in that one. Because I like that one first because that X-ray is taken before any dissection is done. This is that right above the right collarbone, the clavicle, and right against the second T2, the second vertebra. This is, see, we're seeing it backwards because we're now looking at the right side on the back. So this is on the right side, right here, and that wasn't found until the next day. That's why I thought it would be of value to have the original, which I'm glad you said it happened, because we always put the dates on them, and we put a name on them, a number or names so that they can be identified. Just like a fingerprint has to have a name on it, or else you don't know whose fingerprint it is. You don't have any marking on it, as here, then you don't know who it came from. And in this instance, the date would also be on, and there would be predicting in advance. August 9th on the first X-rays, and August 10th on the one that has only one bullet and where everything's been removed, except for this bullet.
And so you can have, and for the record, this is State's Exhibit 197. Doctor, do you think it's ever proper for a forensic pathologist to use their finger to find a bullet trajectory?
No, same as a dowel, because you could puncture things, and you do a proper dissection. And that's why we dissect bodies, so you don't have to stick objects into a wound and make it worse, and change the shape of the wound.
In a situation like this, where the actual shooting occurred in the close proximity of a U-shaped kitchen, and multiple shots are fired, would you expect stippling to be found in different places of the body?
Yes, if depending on how close the muzzle is to the skin, and also depending on the clothing, because that's why we have to have clothing not removed at the scene when looking at it in the autopsy room to see how much of the stippling has been absorbed by the clothing. The layered clothing she was wearing, stippling could be taken out by the multiple layers of the clothing, soot and stippling, so that makes it more difficult to interpret distance.
And to your knowledge and the investigation that you've done in this case, was that done in this case? Was the clothing analyzed in a laboratory setting? Are you aware?
No, it was looked at and photographed at the scene, which, in my opinion, is the wrong way for a medical examiner to proceed.
Now, in all the investigations that you've conducted, have you ever removed clothing at a scene?
No, and I've not seen it done before.
Now, the figure that you testified that shows the approximation of what your opinion is that the decedent was standing when she was shot. Her arm being in this position, is that something that would completely negate the possibility of her catching stippling anywhere on her face and neck?
The stippling can go up to, which is powder granules, and the powder can go up to about 18 to 24 inches, on the body. When there's test firing against a white object, it can go further because you can see the tiny bits of stippling further out than you can if you're looking at the body. So medical examiners can only see stippling for about 18 to 24 inches. And certainly stippling can go on the left wrist, as was described by the medical examiner, and some of it can continue on to the chest, too, because the chest is within that 24-inch range. And also, the stippling in 3 can it go from the chin to there, more than 3 inches. And also, in the photograph they showed, is a good example where 3 is a re-entrance wound. You see, it's not round. It's the shape of 3 in that photograph was a re-entrance wound from one of these bullets in the left arm.
State's Exhibit 194. I'm going to put up State's Exhibit 194, even though it has this little leg. Or actually, could you stand up here, Doctor? And could you explain to the jury why you believe that that is a re-entry?
Yeah. 3 itself is oblong. It's not like the round circle. It's not like the round circle of the bullet wounds on the back of the arm. Those 5 are all entrance wounds. This is oblong, which starts out as a re-entrance. The bullet is not going nose first. The bullet goes nose first into the arm, round circles. Comes out, and some of them are spinning in different ways. It's off the trajectory, and they're twisting around in different ways depending on how they hit the bone. And the actual hole in 3 is very oblong, almost rectangular. And in my opinion, this is a good example of a re-entrance wound, just like the other some of the other chest wounds or re-entry wounds have a similar shape. And there is stippling in these close-ups, and that could be from it could be from going through the arm, around the arm, but stippling doesn't occur with re-entrance wounds because all the powder, the stippling itself, the hole itself doesn't carry with it, the bullet doesn't carry with it powder, a gunshot powder, after it's been absorbed through the skin, except on the outside and except from number A, which in the autopsy report says that the stippling in A extends to 3. 1 and 3 have stippling, and that would be my opinion.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, the wounds sustained to the left hand, you cannot give an opinion as to what she was doing with her right hand, correct?
That's correct. I'm sorry.
Sustained. Ask some open-ended questions, please.
The wounds that she sustained to the left hand, does that interfere with your ability to give an opinion on what she was doing with her right hand?
As I testified earlier on the cross-examination, I can't tell from the autopsy what was happening with the right hand. I can't tell whether she's going forward, going backwards, has a knife or what do you call it, a blunt object in the right hand, or doing nothing with the right hand. So that's why we intentionally left it out of that photograph, to show that the autopsy doesn't cast any implication of what was happening with the right hand. The left hand, yes, but not the right hand.
Because Mr. Dunn spent quite a bit of time regarding the injuries to her left hand and how that would make her left hand inoperable at the time of the shooting. The injuries, just to be clear, the injuries to her left hand do not affect her ability to use her right hand, correct?
That's correct. I'm sorry.
Overruled.
I'm sorry.
Do the injuries to her left hand interfere with any other functions in her body at that time?
No.
Mr. Dunn spent quite a bit of time talking about the finances and the money that you've charged. Doctor, are you capable, as a doctor, to come in here to this court and to testify to anything that you do not believe is true to this jury for money?
No, if I would not, I'd never testify to anything that I don't believe to be true.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions.
Thank you, Doctor. You are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Can we from sidebar, please?
Yes. With reporter?